welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. The steady hum of the main transformer had been my lullaby for 15 years, but today it sounded wrong. Off by maybe half a hertz, like a guitar string wound too tight. I paused halfway up the metal grating stairs to the control room, my steel-toed boots ringing against the diamond plate steel in the cavernous space of the Millbrook Regional Power Facility. Probably nothing, I muttered, but my hand was already reaching for the voltage meter clipped to my belt. 15 years as a senior electrical engineer had taught me to trust my ears more than the digital readouts. The massive transformers hummed their electric songs at 60 hertz, and I knew every harmonic, every overtone that meant trouble. The control room buzzed with its usual morning activity. Banks of monitors displayed power flow across 3 states in real-time neon green lines pulsing with megawatts, feeding the hungry grid that kept 40 million people's lights on. But something was off. The power load on Sector 7 flickered between normal and 20% over capacity every few seconds, the display updating with mechanical precision. "Martinez, you seeing this?" I called to the day shift supervisor, pointing at the anomaly. "Been doing that for about 10 minutes, Carlos replied, not looking up from his coffee. "Probably just a faulty sensor. I'll put in a work order." I stared at the display. The fluctuation was too regular, too precise. Every 12 seconds, like clockwork. Natural load variations were chaotic, organic, people turning on coffee makers, air conditioners cycling on and off, the random pulse of a living city. This was something else entirely. My phone buzzed against my hip. A text from Quinn. "Left something in your locker. Important. Check it when you get a chance." Quinn never left anything in my locker. My younger sibling was obsessive about organization, kept everything in its proper place with military precision. If Quinn was using my locker as a dead drop, something was seriously wrong. The alarm tone started low, almost subliminal, a bass note that seemed to vibrate through the concrete floor. Then another sector joined in, and another. The harmonics built into a discordant symphony that made my teeth ache and my skin crawl. Red lights began flashing on the main display board in synchronized pulses. What the hell? Martinez was on his feet now, coffee forgotten. Sector 12 just spiked to 150% capacity. I was already moving, my boots clanging on the metal stairs as I descended to the transformer level. The smell hit me first, sharp ozone and hot copper. The metallic tang of electricity pushed beyond its limits. The main transformer's hum had shifted to a deeper, more aggressive tone, like a warning growl from some massive predator. "Sector 15 is redlining," someone shouted from above, their voice barely audible over the growing cacophony. My locker was in the break room, tucked between the humming vending machines and the bulletin board covered in OSHA safety notices. I spun the combination lock with shaking fingers. 15-27-09, Quinn's birthday. Inside, wedged between my spare hard hat and emergency rain gear, was Quinn's security badge for the Riverside Data Center. The badge was cracked down the middle, the magnetic strip partially melted as if it had been exposed to extreme heat. But taped to the back was a note in Quinn's precise block letters. They're in the system. Grid compromised. Don't trust the readouts. Find the manual overrides. Q. My blood went cold. Quinn worked cybersecurity for the Regional Power Authority. Spent days hunting through network logs for signs of intrusion. If Quinn said the grid was compromised, it meant someone had gotten past every firewall, every security protocol we had in place. The facility's emergency klaxon began wailing, a bone-deep sound I'd only heard during monthly drills. Through the break room window, I could see the main control room erupting in chaos. Every monitor was flashing red now, displaying warnings in rapid succession like a digital seizure. I ran back up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, my lungs burning. Martinez was on the phone with the state emergency coordinator, his face pale and slick with sweat. No, sir, this isn't a drill. We've got cascading failures across the entire eastern grid. The main display showed a nightmare scenario unfolding in real time. Power stations from Virginia to Maine were going dark, represented by red X's spreading across the digital map like a virus eating through healthy tissue. The remaining green lines showed massive overloads as the grid tried to compensate for the lost capacity, each line pulsing brighter and brighter until they too winked out. We need to isolate our sector, I shouted over the alarms. Cut the transmission lines before we get pulled into the cascade. Can't, Martinez yelled back. The automatic isolation protocols aren't responding. It's like the safety systems are locked out. I stared at the display. Quinn's note crumpled in my fist. Someone had taken control of the power grid's computer systems, and they were using it to create a domino effect that would bring down the entire eastern seaboard. The fluctuations I'd noticed weren't random sensor glitches. They were deliberate, calculated strikes at the grid's most vulnerable points. The transformer's hum shifted again, rising to a dangerous whine that made my fillings ache. I'd heard that sound once before, during a near meltdown at the Yorktown facility. We had maybe 10 minutes before catastrophic failure, maybe less. Martinez, I need you to call my sister Quinn at the data center. Tell her Ronan said to initiate Protocol 7. What's Protocol 7? Just do it. I was already moving toward the manual control panel, a relic from the 1980s that the bureaucrats had wanted to remove during the last modernization. Thank God they'd been too cheap to follow through. The manual controls were hardwired. No computer interface, no network connection. If someone had compromised our digital systems, the old analog switches might be our only hope. The first manual switch was stiff with disuse, the metal contacts corroded but functional. It gave way with a satisfying click and a small shower of sparks. One transmission line isolated. 5 more to go. Behind me, the alarms reached a crescendo that made my ears ring and my vision blur. Through the control room windows, I could see the lights in the employee parking lot flickering and dying like fireflies at dawn. The cascade was spreading, and we were running out of time. My phone buzzed again. Quinn, data center under attack. Physical breach. Can't stop it remotely. You need to get to the manual overrides now. I threw the second switch, then the third, each contact sending a jolt of electricity up my arm. The main transformer's whine began to subside, but the damage was already spreading through the grid like poison through veins. On the display, another dozen power stations winked out of existence, their red X's marking the death of entire cities' electrical systems. Ronan! Martinez grabbed my shoulder hard enough to bruise. Emergency coordinator wants to evacuate the facility. They're calling it a potential terrorist attack. I looked at the manual control panel, then at the spreading chaos on the digital display. Half the switches were thrown, but the other half controlled transmission lines that still had juice flowing through them, millions of volts looking for somewhere to go. If I stayed and finished the job, maybe I could prevent a complete blackout. But if this was really a terrorist attack, staying meant putting myself directly in the crosshairs. Through the window, I could see cars already streaming out of the parking lot, their headlights cutting through the growing darkness as streetlights failed one by one. In the distance, the glow of the city was dimming, entire neighborhoods going dark in expanding waves. The darkness was spreading faster than any natural blackout, too coordinated to be accidental. Quinn's badge felt warm in my pocket, the cracked plastic a reminder of whatever hell my sibling was facing at the data center. I had to make a choice. Follow evacuation protocols and hope someone else could fix this, or stay and try to save what was left of the grid. The fourth switch clicked home with a violent spark that made my arm jerk and left the taste of copper in my mouth. 2 more to go, but each one was getting harder to throw as the electrical load shifted and surged. The transformer's hum was almost back to normal, but the damage was spreading faster than I could contain it. Through the radio chatter, I heard reports of hospital backup generators failing, traffic systems going dark, and emergency services struggling to coordinate without reliable communications. People were going to die in the darkness spreading across the eastern seaboard. I reached for the 5th switch, knowing that each second I delayed, more people would die. The metal was hot under my palm, electricity eager to arc through anything that offered it a path to ground, including me. The choice was made. I was staying. The 5th switch fought me like a living thing, its metal contacts welded together by decades of electrical current. Sweat stung my eyes as I threw my full weight against the lever, the muscles in my shoulders screaming as metal ground against metal with the shriek of tortured steel. When it finally gave way, the release sent me stumbling backward into the control panel, my elbow cracking against an analog gauge that had been faithfully measuring voltage since the Carter administration. Blood trickled down my arm, mixing with the grease and copper dust that coated everything in the transformer room. "Ronan, you need to see this." Martinez's voice cut through the chaos, tight with barely controlled panic. He was hunched over a backup radio, an ancient Motorola that crackled with static. Emergency coordinators calling for immediate evacuation. They're saying this isn't just a power failure. I threw the 6th and final switch, my palm blistering from the heat of the metal contacts. The Millbrook facility was now completely isolated from the grid, our massive transformers humming their normal 60 Hz lullaby for the first time in an hour. But on the main display, the eastern seaboard continued to die in real time, red X's spreading like cancer across the digital map. The air tasted of ozone and burned copper, sharp and metallic on my tongue. "What do you mean it's not just a power failure?" I wiped my hands on my coveralls, leaving dark smears of grease and blood from my torn palm. Martinez held up the radio, his face pale under the emergency lighting. "Coordinated attacks on power infrastructure from Virginia to Maine. They're calling it a national security incident. DHS is mobilizing, but they want all non-essential personnel evacuated from critical facilities." Through the reinforced windows of the control room, I could see the last of the day shift employees streaming toward the parking lot, their silhouettes backlit by the failing streetlights. The darkness was spreading faster now, entire city blocks going black in synchronized waves that followed the power lines like a plague following trade routes. My phone rang, Quinn's ringtone, the opening bars of Thunderstruck that had seemed funny when we were kids. Now it felt like a prayer to whatever gods watched over electrical engineers. The sound cut through the ambient noise of cooling fans and the distant hum of emergency generators kicking in across the city. "Ronan, thank God." Quinn's voice was tight with stress, punctuated by the sound of sirens and what sounded like automatic gunfire in the distance. "I'm in the underground bunker at the data center. We've got maybe 20 minutes before they breach the main server room." Who's they? That's the million-dollar question. Professional team, military precision. They knew exactly which servers to hit first, the ones that control the automated safety systems for the Eastern Grid. They're not just shutting down power, they're making sure it can't be turned back on remotely. I felt my stomach drop. The automated safety systems were the grid's immune system, designed to prevent cascading failures by isolating damaged sections and rerouting power around problems. Without them, the entire eastern seaboard was defenseless against the kind of coordinated attack we were seeing. "Can you restore the safety systems?" "Not from here. They planted some kind of malware that's rewriting the control software in real time. I've never seen anything like it. It's like the code is evolving, adapting to our countermeasures faster than we can implement them." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Someone hadn't just attacked the power grid. They'd created a digital virus specifically designed to spread through the control systems, learning and adapting as it went. This wasn't vandalism or terrorism. It was warfare. The taste of copper grew stronger in my mouth, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs as the full scope of the attack became clear. "Quinn, you need to get out of there." "Can't. I'm the only one who knows the manual override codes for the bunker systems. If I leave now, they'll have complete access to the backup control networks. The entire eastern seaboard will be dark for months." Static erupted from the radio as Martinez adjusted the frequency, trying to maintain contact with the emergency coordinator. Through the crackling interference, I caught fragments of reports. National Guard mobilizing, backup generators failing at Walter Reed, traffic collisions on I-95. The scope of the disaster was becoming clear. This wasn't just a power failure. It was the systematic destruction of the infrastructure that kept 40 million people alive. Hospitals, traffic control systems, water treatment plants, communication networks, all of it depended on the electrical grid that someone was methodically dismantling. "Ronan, I need you to listen carefully." Quinn's voice was steady now, the controlled calm of someone who had accepted the worst-case scenario. "There's a manual override system for the Eastern Grid hardwired connections that bypass all the computer controls. The main nexus is in the bunker system beneath the Riverside facility, about 20 miles from you." "Where exactly?" "Service Tunnel B7. Behind the main transformer vault. There's a maintenance hatch that leads to the underground complex. The system was installed during the Cold War, designed to keep the grid running even if the Russians nuked our command centers." I grabbed a pen and started sketching on the back of a work order, mapping out the route from Millbrook to Riverside. 20 miles through increasingly chaotic traffic, assuming the roads were still passable. The radio chatter suggested otherwise. Reports of multi-car pileups as traffic lights failed, accidents in tunnels where emergency lighting had gone dark. "The manual override requires 2 keys, Quinn continued. "I've got one here at the data center. The other should be in the emergency coordinator's safe at the county office. Should be, assuming she didn't evacuate with everyone else. Martinez was shaking his head, pointing at the radio. Emergency coordinators relocating to the state capital. Something about a secure facility. No word on when she'll be back. I felt the walls closing in. Without both keys, the manual override system was useless. And with each passing minute, more people were dying in the spreading darkness. Hospital patients on life support, people trapped in elevators, car accidents at intersections where traffic lights had failed. The death toll was climbing exponentially. There's another option, Quinn said quietly. The system has a failsafe, a single-key override that can be activated from the bunker. But it requires someone to stay behind and manually control the power distribution. And once it's activated, the person inside can't leave until the grid is fully restored. The implication was clear. Someone would have to sacrifice themselves to save the grid, staying in the bunker while the rest of the world went dark, manually routing power to hospitals and emergency services until the automated systems could be restored. How long would that take? Days, maybe weeks. And that's assuming the attackers don't find the bunker and finish the job. Through the window, I could see the last security guard locking the main gate, his flashlight beam dancing across the empty parking lot. The Millbrook facility was now completely abandoned except for Martinez and me, two men trying to hold back the tide of darkness with nothing but analog switches and determination. The radio crackled to life again, this time with a voice I recognized, Stella Morrison, the county emergency coordinator. All facility personnel, this is emergency command. We have confirmed reports of sabotage at multiple power stations. This is not a drill. All non-essential personnel are to evacuate immediately to designated shelters. I grabbed the radio from Martinez. Stella, this is Ronan McKenna at Millbrook. I need to know if you still have the manual override key. Ronan, you're supposed to be evacuated. The roads are getting dangerous. We've got reports of armed groups taking advantage of the chaos. Do you have the key? A pause, filled with static and the sound of sirens in the background. I've got it. But Ronan, the manual override system is theoretical. It's never been tested at this scale. The power loads involved could kill anyone who tries to operate it. It's our only option. The automated systems are compromised. Then we need to get you to the bunker. I'll meet you at the Riverside facility with the key. But Ronan, this is a one-way trip. Once someone goes into that bunker, they're not coming out until this is over. I looked at Martinez, who was frantically trying to raise other facilities on the radio. Most weren't responding. The ones that were reported the same story, automated systems compromised, manual overrides the only option, and no one qualified to operate them. I'll do it, I said into the radio. But I need Quinn extracted from the data center first. Can you coordinate with DHS? I'll try. But Ronan, the data center is under active attack. Military-grade equipment, professional operators. This isn't random terrorism. This is an act of war. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. An act of war. Someone, another nation, a terrorist organization, or something worse, had just declared war on the United States by attacking our most vulnerable infrastructure. And they were winning. Martinez, you need to evacuate, I said, clipping the radio to my belt. Get to the shelters. Help coordinate the response from there. What about you? I looked at the main display, where the red X's continued to spread across the eastern seaboard like a fatal infection. In the distance, I could see the glow of fires starting to bloom in the darkened city. Emergency services overwhelmed and unable to respond effectively. "I'm going to the bunker. Someone has to try." Martinez nodded grimly, gathering his personal effects from his desk. The company trucks got a full tank and emergency supplies. "Keys are in the ignition." As he headed for the door, I took one last look at the control room where I'd spent the last 15 years of my life. The analog gauges were still functioning, their needles steady and reliable even as the digital displays showed nothing but chaos. There was something comforting about that. Proof that the old ways, the manual systems, could still function when everything else failed. But comfort was a luxury I couldn't afford. 20 miles of increasingly dangerous roads lay between me and the bunker, and every minute I delayed, more people died in the spreading darkness. I grabbed my emergency gear and headed for the door, leaving the steady hum of the transformers behind. The parking lot was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant rumble of emergency generators and the wail of sirens from the city. The company truck, a heavy-duty pickup with emergency lighting and a full complement of electrical tools, sat waiting like a faithful horse. As I climbed into the driver's seat, my phone buzzed with a text from Quinn. "Bunker breached. Going deeper. Find another way to the manual override. Don't trust anyone." I stared at the message, my blood running cold. If Quinn was right, if this was a coordinated attack by professionals with inside knowledge, then anyone could be compromised. The emergency coordinator, the DHS response team, even the military units being mobilized, how could I know who to trust? The truck's engine roared to life, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. 20 miles to the bunker, through chaos and uncertainty, carrying the hopes of 40 million people who were counting on the lights to come back on. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the relative safety of the Millbrook facility behind. In the rearview mirror, I could see the facility's emergency lighting flickering and dying. Another small victory for whoever was orchestrating this attack. But they'd made one mistake. They'd assumed that modern engineers had forgotten the old ways, that we'd become completely dependent on computer controls and automated systems. They hadn't counted on someone like me, someone who'd learned to read the electrical grid like a book, who understood that sometimes the only way forward was to go backward, to the manual systems that had kept the lights on long before computers were invented. The road ahead was dark and dangerous, but I had a job to do. The lights would come back on even if it killed me. The Riverside facility crouched in the darkness like a concrete beast, its main building a black silhouette against the orange glow of fires burning in the distance. I killed the truck's headlights 2 blocks away, coasting the final distance on momentum alone. The silence pressed against my eardrums. No electrical hum, no cooling fans, just the metallic tick of the engine cooling and the sharp crack of automatic weapons fire echoing from the city center. 20 miles of apocalypse lay behind me. Overturned cars scattered across dead intersections like broken toys. Abandoned National Guard checkpoints where blood-stained uniforms told stories I didn't want to understand. And twice I'd navigated around burning semi-trucks that turned the empty highways into corridors of hell. The radio had died an hour ago, leaving only static punctuated by desperate emergency calls that went unanswered. The facility's perimeter gate hung open, its electronic locks dead as everything else. I parked the truck behind a transformer housing and grabbed my emergency kit, waterproof flashlight, digital multimeter, basic tools, and the .38 revolver I'd taken from the facility safe. The gun felt alien in my jacket pocket, heavier than it should have been, loaded with the weight of necessity I'd never wanted to understand. The service entrance was exactly where Quinn had described. A maintenance door marked with radiation warnings and high-voltage symbols designed to keep civilians away. But the electronic lock was dead, and someone had already forced entry. Fresh gouges in the steel frame caught my flashlight beam, bright metal exposed where crowbars had done their work. I drew the revolver, my hands steadier than I'd expected as I pushed the door open. The flashlight beam cut through absolute darkness, revealing a corridor that descended into the facility's underground levels. Emergency lighting should have activated automatically, but everything was dark. Either the backup systems had failed, or someone had deliberately killed them. The corridor sloped downward at a precise angle that spoke of military engineering, carved deep into living rock during the Cold War when nuclear annihilation was measured in megatons rather than malware. The walls were lined with heavy conduit and fiber optic cables, the nervous system of the power grid that connected 40 million people to the electrical current that kept them alive. But many of the cables had been severed, their copper cores sparking intermittently as residual current found nowhere to go. "Professional work," I muttered, examining the cuts with my flashlight. Clean, precise, done with industrial cutters that could slice through inch-thick copper like wire. This wasn't random vandalism, it was surgical destruction, designed to cripple the grid's ability to heal itself. A sound ahead made me freeze, footsteps, careful and measured. I killed the flashlight and pressed myself against the corridor wall, feeling rough concrete scrape against my back through my work shirt. The footsteps approached, accompanied by the soft whisper of someone trying to move quietly in absolute darkness. "Ronan McKenna?" The voice was male, educated with a slight accent I couldn't place. Russian, maybe, or Eastern European. "Don't shoot. I'm here to help." I kept the gun trained on the darkness ahead. "Who are you?" "Theodore Volkov. I used to work for the NSA. I know why you're here, and I know who's doing this." A flashlight beam clicked on, revealing a man in his 40s with graying hair and the soft build of someone who'd spent too many years behind a desk. He was wearing civilian clothes, khakis and a polo shirt that had seen better days, but his eyes were alert and his hands were steady. He looked like a suburban dad, not a government operative. "Keep your hands where I can see them," I said, though I lowered the gun slightly. "How do you know my name?" "I've been monitoring emergency communications since the attacks began. When I heard about the coordinated strikes, I knew they'd eventually target the manual override systems. You're the only electrical engineer with the clearance and expertise to operate the Cold War-era equipment." He took a step closer, and I could see that his polo shirt was stained with something dark. Blood, probably his own, judging by the way he favored his left arm. His breathing was shallow, controlled, the breathing of someone managing pain. "I helped design the malware that's attacking your grid," he continued. 3 years ago, when I was still with the agency. It was supposed to be a defensive system, something we could use to protect our infrastructure from cyber attacks. But the project was compromised. Compromised how? Inside job. Someone in the agency sold the source code to a foreign intelligence service. They've been adapting it, evolving it, preparing for this moment. The attack isn't random terrorism. It's the opening move in a larger operation. I felt the blood drain from my face. What kind of operation? Invasion. With the eastern seaboard in darkness, Our military response capabilities are crippled. Communication networks are down, transportation systems are failing, and emergency services are overwhelmed. They're creating a window of vulnerability that could last for weeks. The implications hit me like a physical blow. While we'd been focused on restoring power, someone had been using the blackout as cover for a military operation. The armed groups that Stella had mentioned, the professional teams attacking facilities, they weren't just saboteurs. They were advanced scouts, preparing the way for something much worse. Who's behind this? I asked. Coalition of foreign intelligence services. Russians, Chinese, North Koreans. They've been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. The malware is just the beginning. They've also planted physical devices at critical infrastructure points. He reached into his jacket pocket slowly, careful not to trigger my defensive instincts. What he pulled out was a small electronic device, about the size of a smartphone but encased in military-grade armor plating. LED indicators blinked steadily on its surface. Electromagnetic pulse generator, he explained, designed to fry electronic systems within a half-mile radius. They've planted dozens of these at power stations, communication hubs, and transportation centers. When the malware finishes its work, they'll trigger the EMP devices to ensure nothing can be restored quickly. I stared at the device, feeling the weight of the situation crushing down on me. It wasn't just a power failure. It was a coordinated assault on the entire infrastructure of the eastern United States. And somehow I was supposedly the only one who could stop it. Why should I trust you? Because I'm the one who designed the manual override system. He gestured toward the corridor ahead. Service tunnel B7 leads to the bunker, but the real control system is deeper. Sub-basement level, behind a blast door that was designed to withstand a direct nuclear hit. I have the access codes. And the catch: once we activate the manual override, the system will draw power from the bunker's emergency reactors. Small nuclear units designed to run independently for weeks if necessary. But the reactor controls are analog. They require constant manual adjustment to prevent core meltdown. Someone has to stay behind to monitor them, the sacrifice that Quinn had mentioned. Someone would have to remain in the bunker, manually controlling the power distribution while the grid was restored. And if the enemy found the bunker, that person would be trapped underground with no way to escape. There's something else, Volkov continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. The enemy knows about the manual override system. They've been monitoring our communications, tracking our movements. They know you're here. As if summoned by his words, I heard the distant sound of vehicles approaching the facility. Multiple engines moving in coordination. The rumble of diesel engines and the high whine of turbocharged motors. Professional teams just like the ones that had attacked Quinn's data center. How much time do we have? I asked. Minutes, maybe less. The bunker entrance is at the end of this corridor, but we need to move fast. Once they breach the building, they'll flood the tunnels with gas or explosives. I holstered the revolver and grabbed my emergency kit. Lead the way. We moved through the corridor at a fast walk, our flashlight beams dancing across the damaged cables and blast-scarred walls. The sound of vehicles grew louder, accompanied by the crackle of radio communications in a language I didn't recognize. Russian, definitely Russian. The moral dilemma you're facing, Volkov said as we reached a heavy steel door marked with radiation warnings, isn't just about personal sacrifice. The manual override system can restore power to the eastern seaboard, but it requires making choices about priority distribution. Hospitals, military bases, communication centers, you'll have to decide who gets power and who stays in the dark. The door required a keycard and a numeric code. Volkov produced both, his fingers steady despite the sound of boots echoing in the corridor behind us. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a stairway that descended into the bedrock. "Hospital systems are failing," I said as we started down the stairs. "People are dying without power, and military bases are blind without communication networks. If the invasion force is already mobilizing, every minute without defensive coordination gives them a bigger advantage." The stairway ended at another blast door, this one marked with nuclear symbols and warnings in multiple languages. Beyond it was the real bunker, a Cold War relic that had been designed to keep the lights on even if the world ended above ground. "The choice is yours," Volkov said as he entered the final access code. "Save the civilians who are dying now, or save the military infrastructure that might prevent millions of deaths later. The manual override system can't do both simultaneously." The blast door opened, revealing a chamber that looked like something from a 1960s science fiction movie. Analog gauges, mechanical switches, and hand-drawn charts covered every surface. At the center of the room stood a control panel that looked like the bridge of a nuclear submarine, all brass fittings and bakelite switches. "The reactor controls are here," Volkov said, pointing to a separate panel covered in radiation warnings. "Manual adjustment every few minutes, or the whole system overheats and shuts down. Someone has to stay." I could hear explosions echoing through the facility above us, the sound of the enemy breach teams working their way through the building. They'd be in the tunnels soon, and once they found the bunker, anyone inside would be trapped. "There's a communication system," Volkov continued, indicating a bank of radio equipment. "You can coordinate with emergency services, direct power where it's needed most. But you have to choose civilian infrastructure or military defense." The weight of 40 million lives pressed down on me as I stared at the control panel. Every switch, every dial, every gauge represented thousands of people who were counting on the lights to come back on. But somewhere in the darkness above, an invasion force was preparing to exploit the chaos we'd created. "I need to contact Quinn," I said, reaching for the radio. "And Stella. They need to know what we're really facing." "The radio is hardwired to the bunker's power system," Volkov warned. "Once you activate it, you'll be committed. The manual override can't be operated remotely. Someone has to stay here until the grid is fully restored." I looked at the man who claimed to be my ally, noting the way his hand rested near his jacket pocket. There was something he wasn't telling me, something about his role in this disaster that he was keeping hidden. "You said you helped design the malware," I said carefully. "What exactly was your role?" "I was the lead programmer on the project. The malware was my creation, designed to protect our infrastructure by creating controlled failures that would isolate damaged sections. But the foreign intelligence services have perverted it, turned it into a weapon of mass destruction. And now you want to make up for it by helping me? I want to stop them before they complete their operation. The invasion force is real, Ronin. Paratroopers, naval units, cyber warfare specialists. They're using the blackout as cover for a full-scale assault on the eastern seaboard." The explosions above us were getting closer, and I could hear the sound of metal being torn apart as the enemy teams worked their way through the facility's defenses. Time was running out. The manual override system has a failsafe, Volkov continued. If the operator becomes incapacitated, the system can be activated remotely. But it requires authorization from two sources: the emergency coordinator and a federal authority. Stella and who else? That's the problem. The federal authority was supposed to be someone from DHS or the military. But with communications down and the government scattered, there's no way to get the authorization codes. I stared at the control panel, understanding finally dawning. The manual override system wasn't just a technical challenge. It was a bureaucratic nightmare designed to prevent unauthorized use. Even if I could operate the equipment, I couldn't activate it without proper authorization. Unless, Volkov said quietly, someone with the right clearance level was already present in the bunker. Someone like you? I still have my NSA authorization codes. They should work for another few hours, until the system automatically revokes them due to the security breach. The sound of gunfire echoed through the facility above us, followed by the distinctive crack of military-grade explosives. The enemy was getting closer, and once they breached the bunker, anyone inside would be trapped or killed. I need to make a choice, I said, my hand hovering over the main activation switch. Military defense or civilian infrastructure? I can't save both. Choose quickly, Volkov urged. The enemy teams are almost here. I looked at the control panel, at the switches and dials that controlled the flow of electricity to 40 million people. Quinn was trapped somewhere in the darkness above, fighting to preserve the communication networks that could coordinate a defense. Stella was probably dead or captured, unable to provide the authorization codes that would let me restore power to the hospitals. And somewhere in the chaos, an invasion force was preparing to exploit the vulnerability we'd created. The choice was impossible. Save the civilians who were dying now, or save the military infrastructure that might prevent a much larger catastrophe. Either way, people would die. The only question was how many. I reached for the activation switch, my hand trembling as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the bunker entrance. Whatever choice I made, I'd have to live with the consequences. If I lived at all, the manual override system came alive under my hands like a mechanical beast awakening from decades of sleep. Analog gauges swept across their ranges as I threw the master activation switch, their brass needles trembling against glass faces that hadn't seen light since the Carter administration. The reactor controls hummed with subsonic vibrations that traveled through the concrete floor and into my bones. A sound that spoke of barely contained nuclear fire burning in the depths below. Hospital priority selected, I announced into the radio headset, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting in the facility above. Routing emergency power to medical facilities first. Volkov's face went pale as he monitored the tactical display. Ronan, the military bases are going completely dark. Without communication networks, they can't coordinate defensive responses. The invasion force, people are dying right now. I cut him off, adjusting the power distribution manually as the analog systems responded to my inputs. I can see the medical alerts coming through, life support failures, surgical equipment shutdowns, neonatal units going critical. I'm not letting children die in incubators while we worry about military communications. The bunker's radio crackled with desperate voices from across the eastern seaboard. Emergency coordinators pleading for power restoration, hospital administrators reporting casualty counts that climbed by the minute, and underneath it all, The professional calm of military voices reporting complete communication blackouts at bases from Maine to Georgia. Riverside General, this is McKenna at the Emergency Coordination Center. I spoke into the radio. You should have partial power restoration in 90 seconds. Emergency systems only, life support, surgical suites, ICU units. Lighting and non-critical systems will remain offline. Copy that, McKenna. We've got 17 patients on life support and 3 emergency surgeries in progress. Whatever you're doing, God bless you for it. The reactor controls demanded constant attention, their mechanical gauges showing pressure and temperature readings that had to be adjusted every few minutes to prevent thermal runaway. The system was designed for operation by a full crew of trained technicians, not a single electrical engineer with no nuclear experience. But the manual was clear. If the readings went into the red zones, the reactor would automatically shut down, and the entire eastern seaboard would lose power for weeks. Ronan. Volkov's voice carried a note of panic. The EMP devices are activating. Multiple facilities across the region, they're triggering them in sequence. On the tactical display, red markers began appearing at power stations, communication hubs, and transportation centers. Each marker represented an electromagnetic pulse strong enough to destroy every electronic device within a half-mile radius. The enemy wasn't just attacking the grid. They were ensuring that nothing could be quickly repaired once the immediate crisis passed. How many? I asked, my hands working steadily across the reactor controls as steam pressure built in the primary cooling system. 37 confirmed detonations so far. They're hitting every major infrastructure point that survived the initial cyber attack. Even if we restore power to the hospitals, the supporting infrastructure, water treatment plants, fuel distribution centers, food supply networks, it's all being systematically destroyed. The implications hit me like a physical blow. We'd been thinking about the crisis in terms of hours or days, but the enemy was planning for weeks or months of disruption. They weren't just attacking the power grid. They were attacking the entire foundation of modern civilization. The communication networks, I said, suddenly understanding. If the military bases can't coordinate, Norfolk Naval Base just went dark. Volkov interrupted, reading from the tactical display. Camp Lejeune, Fort Bragg, Dover Air Force Base, all communication systems offline. The invasion force has a clear corridor from the Atlantic to the major population centers. The radio crackled with a new voice, female and authoritative. This is Colonel Sarah Martinez, Emergency Military Coordinator. I need immediate power restoration to Fort Meade and the Pentagon. We're tracking multiple aircraft approaching the coastline, large transport planes, possibly carrying airborne assault troops. I looked at the power distribution controls, calculating the load requirements. The military facilities would need massive amounts of electricity to power their radar systems, communication networks, and defensive equipment. But routing power to the military bases would mean shutting down the hospital systems. Colonel Martinez, this is McKenna. I can give you partial power to Fort Meade, but it means taking hospitals offline. How many aircraft are we talking about? 47 confirmed contacts, possibly more. They're maintaining radio silence and flying low to avoid radar detection. If they're carrying paratroopers, we're looking at a full-scale airborne invasion. The reactor controls began showing warning indicators as the power draw increased. The system was operating at maximum capacity, drawing every available ampere from the nuclear reactors buried deep in the bedrock. But it wasn't enough. The electrical demand from both civilian and military facilities exceeded the capacity of the emergency power grid. "I need to make a choice," I said into the radio. "Hospitals or military bases? The reactor system can't handle both. Those aircraft will be over the major cities in 20 minutes, Colonel Martinez replied. "If we don't have defensive systems online, they'll land unopposed. And if I shut down the hospitals, people will die in the next 5 minutes," I countered. "Heart patients, premature babies, surgical procedures. They can't wait 20 minutes. The sound of explosions echoed through the bunker entrance as the enemy breach teams worked their way through the facility above. Gunfire rattled through the concrete corridors, punctuated by the distinctive crack of military-grade explosives. They were getting closer, and once they reached the bunker, anyone inside would be trapped. "Volkov, how long until they breach the bunker?" 10 minutes, maybe less. They're using shaped charges to blast through the security doors. But there's something else. The EMP devices are affecting the manual override system. The electromagnetic pulses are interfering with the reactor controls. I could see it on the gauges, irregular fluctuations in the power output, digital displays flickering as electromagnetic interference disrupted the control circuits. The system was becoming unstable, fighting against the electronic chaos raging above ground. "The reactor's going critical," I announced, my hands flying across the manual controls as I tried to stabilize the power output. "Temperature and pressure readings are climbing into the danger zone. If the reactor shuts down automatically, we lose everything," Volkov said. "Hospitals, military bases, communication networks. The entire eastern seaboard will be in complete darkness for weeks." The radio crackled with increasing desperation. Hospital administrators reporting equipment failures, military coordinators tracking the approaching invasion force, and emergency services overwhelmed by cascading disasters across the region. Every voice represented thousands of lives hanging in the balance. "McKenna, this is Stella Rodriguez at the County Emergency Center." The voice was weak, strained, but unmistakably familiar. "I'm alive, but barely. The enemy teams hit our facility hard. Most of my staff is dead or wounded." "Stella," I nearly shouted into the radio. "Where are you?" "Underground parking garage, about half a mile from the power facility. I've got maybe a dozen emergency responders with me, but we're trapped. The enemy has the building surrounded." "Can you get to a secure location?" "Negative, but I can see the tactical situation from here." The aircraft Colonel Martinez mentioned, they're not just carrying paratroopers. "We're tracking heavy equipment drops, armored vehicles, advanced communication systems. This is a full-scale military operation." The reactor controls demanded my attention as the power fluctuations grew more severe. The EMP devices were creating a feedback loop, their electromagnetic pulses interfering with the manual override system and causing the reactor to become increasingly unstable. "I have to shut down non-essential systems," I announced. "The reactor can't handle the full load with the EMP interference." "Which systems?" Colonel Martinez asked. "Everything except life support. Hospitals get basic power for critical care. Military bases get minimal power for communication only. No lighting, no air conditioning, no non-essential equipment." "That's not enough for defensive operations," the colonel protested. "We need full power for radar systems, missile defense, aircraft systems. Then people die in the hospitals," I interrupted. Heart surgery patients, intensive care units, neonatal wards, they all go dark. You want to explain to the families why their loved ones died so you could power up weapon systems. The moral weight of the decision pressed down on me like a physical force. Every choice meant death. The only question was whether the casualties would be immediate and visible or delayed and strategic. Save the people dying now or save the people who might die later. The invasion force is 15 minutes out, Volkov reported. If the military bases don't have defensive systems online, then we'll deal with that when it happens, I said, adjusting the power distribution to maintain hospital systems. I won't let people die on operating tables while we play war games. The reactor controls were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. The electromagnetic interference was disrupting the analog gauges, causing them to fluctuate wildly as I tried to maintain stable power output. The system was designed for operation in a nuclear war, but the designers had never anticipated this level of electromagnetic chaos. Ronan, Stella's voice crackled through the radio. I'm monitoring emergency channels. The cascading failures are spreading beyond the electrical grid. Water treatment plants are shutting down. Natural gas distribution systems are failing. Telecommunications networks are completely dark. This isn't just a power failure. It's the complete collapse of infrastructure. How long until total system failure? At the current rate of degradation, maybe 2 hours. After that, even if we restore power, the supporting infrastructure won't be able to handle the load. We're looking at weeks or months of recovery time. The sound of gunfire grew closer, accompanied by the distinctive whine of military vehicles. The enemy teams were almost through the facility's defenses, and once they reached the bunker, the manual override system would be lost. I need to set up an automated sequence, I said, programming the reactor controls for unmanned operation. If they breach the bunker, the system has to continue operating without human intervention. That's not possible, Volkov protested. The reactor requires constant manual adjustment. Without an operator, it will shut down automatically within 30 minutes. Then I'll have to stay. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Once the enemy teams breached the bunker, anyone inside would be trapped or killed. But without someone to monitor the reactor controls, the entire eastern seaboard would lose power permanently. There might be another way. Stella's voice came through the radio. The emergency evacuation tunnels, they connect to the old subway system. If you can get to the tunnels before the enemy reaches the bunker, you might be able to operate the reactor controls remotely. The tunnels were sealed decades ago, Volkov said. And even if they're passable, the reactor controls can't be operated remotely. They require direct physical manipulation. The explosions above us were getting closer, and I could hear the sound of metal being torn apart as the enemy teams worked their way through the facility's final defenses. Time was running out. I'm programming a 30-minute automated sequence, I announced. If I can get to the emergency tunnels, I might be able to return and continue manual operation. If not, the reactor shuts down and 40 million people lose power for weeks, Volkov finished. The radio crackled with multiple voices. Hospital administrators reporting critical system failures, military coordinators tracking the invasion force, and emergency responders across the region calling for help that couldn't be provided. The weight of their desperation pressed down on me as I made the final adjustments to the reactor controls. All stations, this is McKenna. I'm implementing Emergency Protocol 7. All non-essential systems will be shut down in 5 minutes. Hospitals will maintain life support only. Military bases will have minimal communication power. Everything else goes dark. McKenna, this is Colonel Martinez. The invasion force is 10 minutes out. If we don't have defensive systems online, then we'll fight them in the dark. I interrupted. I won't sacrifice dying patients for military hardware. The reactor controls showed stable readings as the automated sequence engaged. 30 minutes of unmanned operation. Enough time to reach the emergency tunnels and assess the situation. But if the tunnels were blocked or damaged, or if the enemy reached the bunker before I could return, the entire eastern seaboard would be condemned to darkness. The breach teams are at the bunker entrance, Volkov reported, watching the tactical display. Shaped charges deployed. We have maybe 3 minutes before they break through. I grabbed my emergency kit and headed for the emergency tunnel access, a narrow passage that led deeper into the bedrock. The tunnel was designed as a last resort, a way for bunker personnel to escape if the main entrance was compromised. But it hadn't been used in decades, and there was no guarantee it was still passable. Ronan, Stella's voice followed me through the radio. Whatever happens, you saved lives today. The hospital systems are stable, the reactor is running, and people are alive because of the choices you made. Tell that to the families of the people who die when the invasion force lands, I replied, sealing the tunnel access behind me. The tunnel was a narrow concrete tube that stretched into absolute darkness, its walls lined with emergency lighting that hadn't functioned in years. I crawled forward on hands and knees, my flashlight beam revealing a passage that seemed to extend forever into the earth. Behind me, the sound of explosions echoed through the bunker as the enemy teams finally breached the entrance. The manual override system was on its own now, 30 minutes of automated operation before it would shut down permanently. 30 minutes to find another way to save 40 million lives. The tunnel ahead was my only hope, and the darkness swallowed me completely as I crawled toward an uncertain future. The emergency tunnel stretched ahead of me like a concrete coffin, its walls weeping condensation that dripped steadily onto my back. 28 minutes left on the automated sequence. 28 minutes before the reactor controls would lock down permanently and the eastern seaboard would go dark forever. My knees were raw and bleeding from crawling across the rough concrete. My shoulders scraped against the tunnel walls with each forward movement. The air grew thinner with every yard, thick with decades of accumulated dust and the metallic taste of corroded ventilation systems. My flashlight beam wavered as the batteries died, but I pushed forward, driven by the desperate voices crackling through my radio headset. McKenna, this is Dr. Sarah Chan at Children's Hospital. The voice carried barely controlled panic. We've got 12 premature babies in the NICU on life support. The backup generators are failing, temperatures dropping in the incubators. We need stable power in the next 15 minutes or we're going to lose them all. 15 minutes. The automated sequence would hold for another 26, but only if the electromagnetic interference didn't disrupt the analog controls. If the enemy teams found a way to override the lockdown, if any critical component failed, if the reactor temperature climbed into the red zone, those babies would die along with thousands of others across the region. The tunnel ahead opened into a wider chamber, and I could see the rusted remains of what had once been a subway platform. The emergency evacuation route connected to the old metro system, abandoned since the 1980s but still structurally sound. I crawled out of the tunnel and stood on shaking legs, my flashlight revealing a cavernous space filled with the echo of dripping water and the distant rumble of collapsing buildings above. "Stella, this is Ronan," I whispered into the radio. "I've reached the old subway platform. Can you still see the tactical display?" "Barely." Her voice was weak, strained. "The enemy teams have control of the bunker. They're trying to access the reactor controls, but the manual override system is locked down. You've got maybe 25 minutes before they figure out how to break the automated sequence." "What about Quinn?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Still trapped in the server facility." Stella's voice was getting weaker, more strained. "The building's structurally unsound. Half the floors have pancaked from the EMP explosions. The gas main on the third floor is leaking, and there are electrical fires spreading through the elevator shafts. Emergency teams can't reach him without specialized heavy rescue equipment. My brother, my twin brother, born 3 minutes after me, the person I'd sworn to protect ever since our parents died in that refinery explosion 15 years ago. Quinn was trapped in a death trap while I crawled through abandoned tunnels, trying to choose between saving him and saving millions of strangers. How long until the building comes down completely? Structural engineers estimate 20 minutes before total collapse," Stella continued. "The support beams are compromised, and the gas leak is spreading through the ventilation system. If it reaches an ignition source, the whole building becomes a bomb," I finished. "What about the heavy rescue equipment? Destroyed. The EMP devices targeted emergency response centers specifically. Fire departments, police stations, emergency medical services. All their electronic equipment is fried. Even the mechanical equipment won't start because the ignition systems are computerized." 20 minutes. Quinn had 20 minutes before the building either collapsed or exploded. The reactor controls had maybe 15 minutes before the enemy teams broke through the security lockdown. And I was trapped in a concrete tomb with no way to reach either location in time. The moral calculus was brutal in its simplicity. Quinn was one person. The reactor controls affected 40 million. But Quinn was my brother, my family, my responsibility. The strangers depending on the power grid were someone else's family, someone else's responsibility. The invasion force has established secure perimeters around major cities," Stella continued, her voice interrupted by bursts of static. "Airborne troops are digging in at strategic locations, power substations, communication hubs, transportation centers. They're not just attacking infrastructure, they're preparing to control it." "How many troops?" Intelligence estimates suggest 2 full battalions, maybe 1,600 paratroopers with armored vehicles, anti-aircraft systems, and mobile command centers. "This isn't a raid or sabotage operation, Ronan. It's the advance guard of a full-scale invasion." The scope of the operation hit me like a physical blow. The enemy hadn't just attacked the power grid. They'd created the perfect conditions for military occupation. With communications dark, transportation paralyzed, and emergency services crippled, organized resistance would be nearly impossible. I leaned against the subway platform wall, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. The reactor controls were the key to everything. Without power, the military couldn't mount an effective defense, hospitals couldn't save lives, and the entire eastern seaboard would be vulnerable to whatever the enemy had planned. "Theo, are you still monitoring the situation?" I asked into the radio. "I'm here," came the guilt-ridden voice of the man who'd helped create this nightmare. The enemy teams are using the facility blueprints I provided to navigate the bunker. They know exactly where the reactor controls are located. How long until they can override the automated sequence? They're using military-grade electronic warfare systems. Theo's voice carried the weight of his guilt. Equipment I helped them acquire through black market channels. They can break through the reactor control security in maybe 15 minutes, maybe less. Once they gain access, they won't just shut down the power grid. They'll use it as a weapon. What do you mean? They can overload the electrical distribution network, sending power surges through the transmission lines that will destroy transformers, substations, and power plants across the entire eastern seaboard. The infrastructure damage will be so severe that even if the invasion is repelled, it will take years to rebuild. 15 minutes. Quinn had 20 before the building collapsed. The reactor had 15 before enemy sabotage. And I was trapped in a concrete maze with no way to save either. There's something else, Theo continued, his voice barely audible. The invasion isn't just about conquering territory. They're planning to use the power grid destruction as cover for something bigger. Military satellites detected unusual radiation signatures at several locations. They think the enemy has deployed tactical nuclear devices. Nuclear weapons? Small ones. Maybe suitcase bombs positioned at key infrastructure points. If they detonate those devices while the power grid is down, the electromagnetic pulse will prevent any electronic equipment from functioning for months. The entire eastern seaboard will be thrown back to the pre-electronic age. The implications were staggering. Not just an invasion, but the complete technological castration of the most economically important region in the country. Millions would die from the secondary effects: medical equipment failure, transportation collapse, communication breakdown, and the social chaos that would follow. The radio crackled with a new voice. Colonel Martinez, speaking with professional calm that barely concealed her desperation. We've lost contact with NORAD, the Pentagon, and Fort Meade. Colonel Martinez's voice cut through the static with professional calm that barely concealed her desperation. The invasion force has neutralized our primary command and control centers. Without the power grid, we can't coordinate defensive operations or communicate with allied forces. What about the National Guard? They're mobilizing but operating completely blind. No communications, no coordination, no intelligence about enemy positions. The invasion force is using our own infrastructure mapping to position themselves at strategic choke points. They know exactly where to hit us. The sound of explosions echoed through the subway tunnel, followed by the distinctive whine of military aircraft. The enemy was consolidating control of the surface, using the chaos of the power failure to establish impregnable defensive positions. Dr. Chun, this is McKenna, I said into the radio. How are the babies? Critical for now, but deteriorating fast. Dr. Chen's voice carried the controlled panic of someone watching children die. The backup generators are showing signs of cascade failure. The EMP damaged the control circuits. Core body temperatures are dropping in the incubators. We need main power restored within the next 8 minutes, or we're going to start losing the most vulnerable babies. 8 minutes. Not 15, not 20. 8 minutes before innocent lives would be lost because of choices I was making in a concrete tomb beneath the earth. Stella, what's the situation at Quinn's location? Critical. Stella's voice was getting weaker. The gas leak has spread through 3 floors, and there are electrical fires in the elevator shafts. The emergency teams have pulled back to a safe distance. They're afraid the whole building might explode. If someone doesn't get Quinn out in the next 12 minutes, it'll be too late. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of impossible mathematics. Save Quinn and let the reactor controls fall into enemy hands, condemning 40 million people to darkness and occupation. Or return to the bunker and fight the sabotage, knowing that my brother would die in the explosion. There's a maintenance tunnel, Theo said suddenly. The old subway system connects to the server facility's basement level. If you can reach Quinn through the underground passages, you might be able to extract him without exposing yourself to the surface dangers. What about the reactor controls? I'll try to buy you time. I know the enemy's equipment, their procedures, their weaknesses. If I can get close enough to the bunker, I might be able to slow them down long enough for you to save Quinn and still get back. That's suicide, Theo. They'll kill you the moment they see you. I'm already dead, he replied quietly. I'm the one who gave them the facility blueprints, the security codes, the reactor specifications. This nightmare exists because of me. The least I can do is try to stop it. The radio crackled with multiple voices. Hospital administrators reporting critical failures, military coordinators tracking enemy movements, and emergency responders calling for help that couldn't be provided. The weight of their desperation pressed against me like a physical force. McKenna, this is Dr. Chun. We're losing the first baby. The life support systems are failing. Colonel Martinez here. The enemy has taken the Pentagon. Without communication networks, we can't coordinate with allied forces. This is Stella, the building where Quinn is trapped. It's starting to collapse. We can hear the support beams failing. I look down the subway tunnel toward the server facility, then back toward the bunker where the reactor controls were located. Two directions, two choices, both leading to tragedy. Theo, how long can you delay the enemy teams? Maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. But it might be enough time for you to reach Quinn and get him to safety. And then the reactor controls fall into enemy hands. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But at least your brother will be alive. The moral calculus was simple in its brutality. Save one person I loved, or save 40 million strangers. Choose family over duty, or duty over family. There was no middle ground, no compromise, no solution that didn't require sacrifice. Dr. Chun, I said into the radio, I'm going to try to restore power to the hospital systems, but I need you to prepare for the possibility that the main grid might fail completely. What does that mean? It means you need to get those babies to hospitals with independent power sources. Use ambulances, helicopters, whatever you can find. Don't wait for the main power to be restored. We don't have enough ambulances for 12 babies, and the helicopters can't fly in the current conditions. Then you need to choose which ones have the best chance of survival during transport. The words tasted like poison in my mouth. I was asking a doctor to decide which babies lived and which died, the same impossible choice I was facing with Quinn and the reactor controls. I can't make that decision, Dr. Chun said. You have to. Because if the main power grid fails, all 12 babies will die. At least this way, some might survive. I turned toward the subway tunnel leading to the server facility, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Quinn was somewhere in that direction, trapped in a collapsing building with a gas leak that could ignite at any moment. My brother, my family, my responsibility. Stella, I'm going after Quinn. What about the reactor controls? Theo's going to try to delay the enemy teams. It might buy us enough time. And if it doesn't, then 40 million people lose power and I'll have to live with that choice. The tunnel ahead was narrow and partially collapsed, filled with debris from decades of neglect. But it was passable, and it led toward the server facility where Quinn was trapped. I started crawling forward, my radio headset crackling with the voices of people I was about to abandon. "McKenna, this is Colonel Martinez. If the reactor controls fall into enemy hands, the entire eastern seaboard will be under foreign occupation within hours. I know millions of people will die in the chaos that follows. I know. Then why are you making this choice?" I paused in the tunnel, my flashlight beam illuminating the concrete walls that seemed to close in around me. "Because he's my brother. Because I promised to protect him. Because sometimes the right choice isn't the smart choice." "That's not good enough," the colonel replied. "Your personal feelings don't outweigh the lives of 40 million people. Maybe not, but they outweigh my ability to abandon family for strangers." The tunnel ahead opened into another chamber, and I could see the structural damage caused by the EMP explosions. The server facility was directly above this section of the subway system, and I could hear the sound of metal groaning under stress as the building slowly collapsed. "Quinn, can you hear me?" I called out, not caring if the enemy troops detected my radio signal. "Ronan." His voice was weak, barely audible through the static. "Where are you?" "Directly below you. I'm in the old subway system. Can you get to a lower floor?" "The stairs are blocked by debris. I'm trapped on the 7th floor, and the elevators are out of power." "What about the emergency stairwells?" "Collapsed. The whole building is coming apart. Ronan, the support beams are failing, and there's a gas leak somewhere. I can smell it getting stronger." I climbed up through a maintenance access that led to the building's basement level. The structure was a maze of concrete and steel, damaged by the EMP explosions and weakened by the subsequent fires. But it was navigable, and I could hear Quinn's voice getting stronger as I climbed toward the upper floors. "Theo, this is Ronan. I'm in the server facility. How much time do I have?" "The enemy teams are at the bunker entrance. I'm going to try to trigger the security lockdown, but once they break through, you'll have maybe 5 minutes before they reach the reactor controls." 5 minutes to get Quinn out and get back to the bunker? Impossible. The distances are too great, and the building is too unstable. You'll have to choose. Save Quinn or save the reactor controls. I reached the 7th floor, my flashlight revealing a scene of devastation. The EMP explosions had destroyed most of the electronic equipment, and the structural damage was worse than I'd imagined. But Quinn was there, trapped under a fallen beam but alive. "Thank God," I whispered, dropping to my knees beside my brother. "Ronan, you shouldn't have come. The building's going to collapse." "Not without you." I examined the beam that had Quinn pinned. It was massive, probably weighing several hundred pounds, but it was balanced precariously on other debris. If I could shift its position just slightly, I might be able to free him. "The reactor controls," Quinn said. "You have to get back to the bunker after I get you out. There's no time. The enemy teams. I don't care about the enemy teams. I care about you." I braced myself against the fallen beam and pushed with all my strength. The metal groaned and shifted slightly, but not enough to free Quinn. I needed leverage, something to use as a fulcrum. "Ronan," Theo's voice crackled through the radio. "The enemy teams have breached the bunker. They're moving toward the reactor controls." "How long?" 3 minutes, maybe less. I found a piece of steel reinforcement rod and wedged it under the beam, using it as a lever to lift the weight off Quinn's legs. The metal shifted, and my brother was able to pull himself free. "Can you walk?" "I think so, but my left leg might be broken." I helped him to his feet, and we made our way toward the maintenance access that led to the subway tunnels. The building groaned around us, its structural integrity failing as the gas leak spread through the ventilation system. "Ronan," Colonel Martinez's voice cut through the radio static. "The enemy teams have reached the reactor controls. They're beginning the shutdown sequence." "How long until the power grid fails?" 90 seconds. We reached the basement level, Quinn leaning heavily on my shoulder as we made our way toward the subway entrance. The tunnel stretched ahead of us, dark and endless, leading away from the collapsing building but also away from the reactor controls that I could no longer reach in time. "I'm sorry," I said into the radio. "I couldn't save both." "You made your choice," Stella replied. "Now we'll have to live with the consequences." The sound of the building's final collapse echoed through the subway tunnel as we crawled towards safety. Behind us, the server facility crumbled into rubble, the gas leak finally igniting in a fireball that lit up the night sky. But Quinn was alive, breathing, safe in the darkness beside me. "The reactor controls?" he asked. "Gone. The enemy has them. 40 million people? Without power. Maybe for weeks." We crawled through the tunnel in silence. Two brothers who had chosen family over duty, personal love over public responsibility. The weight of our decision would follow us for the rest of our lives. The knowledge that we had saved each other while abandoning millions of strangers to darkness. Behind us, the eastern seaboard went black as the enemy teams completed their sabotage of the power grid. Hospitals lost life support, military bases lost communication, and cities lost the infrastructure that made modern life possible. The invasion was complete, the conquest successful, and the darkness absolute. But Quinn was alive, and in the end, that was the only choice I could live with. The subway tunnel stretched endlessly ahead, filled with the acrid smoke of burning electronics and the metallic taste of ozone. Quinn's breathing was labored beside me, his broken leg dragging as we crawled through the debris-choked passage. Behind us, the server facility had collapsed into a mountain of concrete and twisted steel, the gas explosion still echoing through the underground chambers. "How much farther?" Quinn gasped, his voice barely audible above the sound of distant explosions. "Maybe 200 yards to the emergency access point," I replied, checking my watch. 3 minutes since the enemy teams had reached the reactor controls. By now, they should have initiated the complete shutdown sequence, plunging the eastern seaboard into permanent darkness. But something was wrong. The emergency lighting in the tunnel was still functioning, powered by the auxiliary grid that should have failed when the main reactor went offline. Either the enemy teams had encountered unexpected resistance, or Theo had somehow managed to interfere with their sabotage. "Ronan, this is Theo." The radio crackled with static and gunfire. "I've triggered the facility's lockdown protocol. The reactor controls are sealed behind blast doors, but I can only hold them for maybe 60 seconds. 60 seconds? I stopped crawling and grabbed the radio. "That's not enough time to." "Listen to me carefully." Theo's voice was urgent, desperate. "The enemy teams don't know about the manual override system. They think the reactor controls are the only way to shut down the power grid. But there's a backup command center in the old metro station beneath the bunker. If you can reach it in the next 2 minutes, you can prevent the complete shutdown." Quinn grabbed my arm. "Ronan, don't even think about it." The tunnel collapsed behind us, There's no way back to the bunker. There's another route, Theo continued. The maintenance tunnels connect to the old subway system. Follow the main line east for 300 yards. Then take the service ladder up to platform level. The backup command center is behind a steel door marked "Authorized personnel only." I looked at Quinn, then at the tunnel ahead. The emergency access was maybe 200 yards away. Safety, escape, the chance to get medical attention for my brother's injuries. But the backup command center was in the opposite direction, through damaged tunnels that might collapse at any moment. What about the override codes? I asked. Your employee badge has the access codes, Theo replied. The system was designed as a failsafe in case the main reactor controls were compromised. But you have to hurry. The enemy teams are using cutting torches on the blast doors. The moral calculus had shifted. Quinn was safe, injured but alive. The reactor controls were still functional, protected by blast doors that would hold for maybe another minute. And there was a chance, a slim chance, to prevent the complete power grid failure. Quinn, can you make it to the emergency access alone? Don't even think about it, my brother replied. You chose family over duty. Don't second-guess that decision now. This is different. You're safe now, injured, but safe. If I can reach the backup command center, if you can reach it, through collapsed tunnels, past enemy patrols, while the building is falling apart around you. The odds are terrible, Ronan. I looked down the tunnel toward the emergency access, then back toward the subway junction that led to the backup command center. 2 directions, 2 choices, but this time the moral calculus was different. Quinn was no longer in immediate danger, and I had information that could save millions of lives. Theo, how long can you hold the blast doors? Maybe 40 seconds. The cutting torches are making progress. And how long to reach the backup command center? If the tunnels are clear, maybe 90 seconds. But if there's debris or structural damage, then it's impossible. Not impossible. Just very, very dangerous. I helped Quinn to his feet, supporting him as we made our way toward the subway junction. The tunnel branched in 3 directions, one leading to the emergency access, one to the backup command center, and one toward the surface where enemy patrols were undoubtedly searching for survivors. I'm going with you, Quinn said. No, you're injured and you'll slow me down. Get to the emergency access and wait for rescue teams. What if there are no rescue teams? What if the enemy controls the surface? Then hide in the tunnels until the situation stabilizes. But don't follow me. This is too dangerous. I handed Quinn my spare flashlight and checked my watch. 30 seconds since Theo's last transmission. The enemy teams would break through the blast doors within minutes, and I had to cover 300 yards through potentially unstable tunnels. Ronan, Quinn grabbed my arm. If you don't make it back, I'll make it back. If you don't, I want you to know that I understand why you made this choice. Family first, duty second. But now duty and family are aligned. You're trying to save everyone. I squeezed his shoulder and started running down the tunnel toward the backup command center. The passage was narrow and filled with debris from the EMP explosions, but it was navigable. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating concrete walls that wept condensation and electrical conduits that sparked with residual energy. Theo, this is Ronan. I'm in the main tunnel, heading toward the backup command center. The enemy teams are almost through the blast doors. Theo's voice was strained. Maybe 15 seconds left. What's the situation at the hospital? Critical. Dr. Chun reports that 2 babies have died from life support failure. The backup generators are failing throughout the city. 2 babies, dead because I had chosen to save Quinn instead of immediately returning to the reactor controls. The weight of that decision pressed against me like a physical force, driving me forward through the tunnel despite the burning in my lungs and the ache in my muscles. The service ladder appeared ahead, exactly where Theo had described. I climbed up to platform level, my flashlight revealing a scene of devastation. The old metro station had been damaged by the EMP explosions, its ceiling partially collapsed and its walls scarred by electrical fires. The steel door should be on the north wall, Theo's voice crackled through the radio. Marked, authorized personnel only. I found the door, its surface blackened by fire but still intact. My employee badge triggered the electronic lock, and the door slid open to reveal a small chamber filled with analog control systems and mechanical switches. This was the backup command center, designed to function even if the main reactor controls were destroyed. "I'm in," I said into the radio. "What do I need to do?" The main power restoration sequence is controlled by 3 switches on the central panel. Flip them in sequence: red, green, blue. But be careful. The system was designed for trained operators. I found the switches, their labels barely visible in the dim emergency lighting. Red for auxiliary power, green for main grid restoration, blue for full system activation. Simple in theory, but I could see warning labels indicating that improper sequencing could cause cascade failures throughout the electrical distribution network. "Theo, what happens if I make a mistake? Best case scenario, you blow a few transformers. Worst case, you overload the entire eastern seaboard and cause permanent damage to the infrastructure. And if I don't try, 40 million people lose power permanently. The invasion succeeds, and the country falls apart." I reached for the red switch, my hand trembling slightly. 2 babies had already died because of my choices. Millions more would suffer if I failed to restore power. But millions more could die if I made the wrong choice in the restoration sequence. "Ronan," Dr. Chen's voice cut through the radio static. "We've lost another baby. The life support systems are failing faster than we anticipated. 3 babies. Dead because I had hesitated, because I had chosen family over duty, because I had second-guessed myself at every critical moment. The weight of their deaths would follow me for the rest of my life." I flipped the red switch, the chamber filled with the hum of electrical equipment coming online. Lights began flickering throughout the tunnel system, and I could hear the distant sound of generators starting up. The auxiliary power was restored, but the main grid was still dark. "Good." Theo's voice was urgent. "Now the green switch, but wait for the auxiliary systems to stabilize. Maybe 10 seconds. I counted down, watching the electrical meters on the control panel. The auxiliary power was steady, but I could see fluctuations that suggested the system was under stress. If I moved too quickly, the sudden load could cause the entire network to collapse. "Ronan," Colonel Martinez's voice crackled through the radio. "The enemy teams have broken through the blast doors. They're in the main reactor control room. How long until they can shut down the system? Maybe 30 seconds. They're using the same codes I provided for the sabotage operation." I reached for the green switch, knowing that I was racing against time. The enemy teams could shut down the reactor at any moment, making the backup command center useless. But if I rushed the restoration sequence, I could destroy the very infrastructure I was trying to save. 10 seconds, I whispered to myself, watching the electrical meters stabilize. "Ronan, this is Stella." Her voice was weak but determined. "The enemy teams are accessing the reactor controls. You have to move now." I flipped the green switch. The tunnel system exploded with light as the main grid came back online. I could hear the sound of electrical equipment throughout the city starting up, the hum of transformers and substations resuming their normal operations. But the restoration was only partial. Many systems remained offline, damaged by the EMP explosions or shut down by safety protocols. "The blue switch," Theo urged. "Full system activation. But be careful. This one carries the highest risk." I paused, my hand on the final switch. The main grid was partially restored, enough to power critical systems like hospitals and emergency services. But full activation would bring the entire eastern seaboard back online, including military communications and defense systems. "What are the risks?" "If the system can't handle the full load, you could trigger cascade failures throughout the network. Rolling blackouts, transformer explosions, power plant shutdowns. The damage could be worse than the original sabotage. And if I don't activate it, the enemy retains control of major infrastructure. They can shut down power to strategic areas, prevent military coordination, and maintain their tactical advantage." I could hear the sound of gunfire echoing through the tunnel system. The enemy teams had discovered my location and were moving to stop me. I had maybe 30 seconds before they breached the backup command center. "Dr. Chun, what's the situation at the hospital?" "The partial power restoration saved 6 of the babies. But we need full power to operate the advanced life support systems. Without it, we'll lose the rest within the hour." 6 babies saved. 6 more at risk. The moral calculus was shifting again, but the fundamental choice remained the same. Risk everything to save everyone, or accept partial success with partial failure. Behind me, the steel door buckled inward as the enemy soldiers attached shaped charges to the hinges. The explosion came 3 seconds later, a sharp crack that filled the chamber with smoke and concrete dust. Through the haze, I could see tactical lights cutting through the darkness and the distinctive silhouettes of soldiers in full combat gear. "Target acquired," one of them shouted in accented English. "Civilian at the control station." I grabbed my radio and sprinted toward the service ladder, my ears ringing from the explosion. The soldiers were methodical, professional. They didn't fire immediately, instead moving to secure the control systems and determine what damage I had caused. "Stand down," the lead soldier commanded. "You have interfered with a military operation." "Your military operation just failed," I replied, disappearing down the ladder shaft. I flipped the blue switch. The backup command center erupted in a shower of sparks as the full power grid surged back to life. The analog meters pegged into the red zone, their needles vibrating violently as massive electrical loads shifted across the network. Through the concrete walls, I could hear the deep harmonic hum of transformers accepting full power, the sound growing from a whisper to a roar as the eastern seaboard awakened from its forced slumber. Warning lights flashed across the control panel like a constellation of amber stars. 3 major substations showed overload conditions, their transformers struggling to handle the sudden restoration. But the core restoration sequence held. Hospitals, emergency services, and military installations were coming back online with stable power. The victory was real but fragile. The electrical surge had damaged transformer cooling systems at 2 substations, and cascade failure warnings flickered at multiple distribution points. The power grid was restored, but it was running on borrowed time, vulnerable to additional sabotage or technical failures. "Ronan, get out of there." Theo's voice was urgent. "The enemy teams are through the door." I grabbed the radio and ran toward the service ladder, my ears ringing from the electrical explosions. Behind me, armed figures in tactical gear poured into the backup command center, their weapons raised and their faces hidden behind night vision goggles. "Stop!" one of them shouted in accented English. "You have caused great damage to the operation." I reached the ladder and began climbing down to tunnel level. Above me, the enemy soldiers were examining the control systems, trying to determine what I had done and whether they could reverse it. "The power grid is restored," I said into the radio, "but it's unstable. Multiple transformer failures, cascade risks at several substations." "How long will it hold?" Colonel Martinez asked. "Hard to say. Maybe hours, maybe days. The system needs immediate maintenance and load balancing." I reached the tunnel level and began running toward the emergency access where Quinn was waiting. Behind me, the enemy soldiers were rappelling down the ladder shaft, their tactical lights sweeping the tunnel like deadly fireflies. The sound of their boots on concrete echoed through the passage, but they were cautious, methodical. They knew the tunnels could collapse at any moment. "Control, this is Alpha Team," I heard one of them report. "The power grid restoration is complete. The civilian escaped through the subway system." "Copy, Alpha Team. Primary objective failed. Begin extraction protocols." The backup command center was compromised, but the damage was already done. The power grid was online, emergency services were restored, and the invasion had lost its primary tactical advantage. The enemy soldiers could hunt me through the tunnels, but they couldn't undo what I had accomplished. "Ronan," Quinn's voice called from ahead. "This way." I found an exit. I followed his voice through the tunnel system, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The emergency access led to a maintenance facility on the surface, where Quinn was waiting with a group of electrical workers who had been trapped underground during the initial attack. "The power's back on," one of them said, "but we're getting reports of transformer failures throughout the city." "How bad?" 3 major substations offline, rolling blackouts in several neighborhoods. "The system is functional, but barely stable." I emerged from the tunnel into the pre-dawn darkness, my eyes adjusting to the sight of a city partially restored. Street lights flickered inconsistently, some neighborhoods remained dark, and the skyline was scarred by the smoke of electrical fires. But the hospital district was brightly lit, and I could see aircraft beginning to move across the sky as military communications came back online. "Dr. Chun, this is Ronan. What's the situation with the babies?" "All 12 are stable." Dr. Chen's voice carried profound relief mixed with exhaustion. "The full power restoration allowed us to restart the advanced life support systems. The incubators are maintaining proper temperature, the ventilators are functioning normally, and the cardiac monitors are showing stable rhythms. We're not going to lose any more babies." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of that victory. 12 premature lives saved by the restoration of electrical power. 3 had died during the blackout, their tiny hearts unable to survive without the machines that kept them alive. But 9 were safe now, their futures secured by the humming of electrical equipment and the steady glow of monitoring screens. "What about the other hospitals?" "Emergency power is restored throughout the medical district. Surgery suites are operational, ICU equipment is functioning, and the emergency rooms can handle trauma cases. We estimate that the power restoration saved approximately 300 lives across the metropolitan area. Colonel Martinez, what's the military situation? Communications are restored, and we're coordinating with allied forces. The enemy invasion force is regrouping, but they've lost their primary tactical advantage. We expect to begin counterattack operations within the hour. I looked at Quinn, who was leaning against a utility pole, his injured leg wrapped in makeshift bandages. My brother was alive, breathing, safe despite the permanent limp he would carry for the rest of his life. The babies were safe, their tiny hearts beating steadily in their incubators. The power grid was restored, but scarred by the violence of its resurrection. The victory was real but precarious. We had prevented the complete collapse of Eastern Seaboard infrastructure, but the cost was written in damaged transformers, overloaded circuits, and the knowledge that the enemy saboteurs were still active. The invasion had failed, but the war was far from over. What now? Quinn asked, his voice hoarse from the concrete dust and smoke. Now we rebuild what we can, and we prepare for the next attack. The enemy won't give up easily, and our power grid is held together with emergency repairs and borrowed time. And us, we survive. We protect the people we can protect. We make the hard choices when they need to be made. The Eastern Seaboard emerged from darkness as the sun rose over a city scarred by sabotage but still functioning. The invasion had failed, the power grid was restored, and the babies were safe. But the victory was fragile, built on damaged infrastructure and maintained by systems that could collapse at any moment. I had made the hard choice, family first, then duty. I had saved Quinn, then saved millions of strangers. But the moral calculus would follow me forever. The knowledge that every choice carried consequences, that every decision required sacrifice. 3 babies had died because of my choices. 300 lives had been saved because of my choices. The mathematics of survival was written in electrical current and human suffering, measured in restored power and permanent injury. The power was restored, but the darkness would always be waiting, ready to return when the next crisis emerged. And I would be there, making the hard choices, carrying the weight of decisions that no one should have to make. Because that's what it meant to be responsible for the infrastructure that kept civilization running, the power to give life, and the power to watch it slip away in the space between one heartbeat and the next.